Picture this, it's 1944, and Hollywood's most notorious bachelor, a man who once said marriage was an institution, and I'm not ready for an institution, locks eyes with a 19-year-old nobody from the Bronx. Within seconds, he whispers to the director, "I'm going to marry that girl." She overhears him and thinks he's absolutely ridiculous. But here's what nobody knew. This wasn't just another Hollywood fling. This was the beginning of a love so intense, so transformative, that it would rewrite both their destinies forever. By the end of this story, you'll understand the 6 principles that can turn even the most unlikely attraction into soul-deep devotion. Humphrey DeForest Bogart was born into privilege on Christmas Day, 1899, but privilege couldn't protect him from heartbreak. His mother, Maud, was a successful illustrator, one of the first women to break into New York's competitive art world. She was brilliant, ambitious, and emotionally distant. She gave him everything except the one thing he craved most: unconditional love. His father, Dr. Belmont Bogart, was a respected surgeon, but their relationship was formal, almost clinical. Young Humphrey learned early that love had conditions, that affection was something you earned through performance. Deep in his heart, a wound formed, the belief that he wasn't enough, just as he was. By his 20s, Bogart had developed the perfect armor, cynicism wrapped in charm. He married actress Helen Menken in 1926, but the union crumbled within a year. She wanted a husband who could open his heart, he later admitted. And I didn't even know where the key was hidden. His second marriage to Mary Phillips lasted longer, 6 years. But distance and his growing success in Hollywood created an unbridgeable chasm. She stayed in New York pursuing theater while he chased movie stardom 3,000 miles away. Every night in his empty Hollywood apartment, he'd pour himself another drink and wonder if this was just his fate, to be alone even when he wasn't. Then came Mayo Method in 1938. If his first 2 marriages were mistakes, this one was a disaster wrapped in passion. Mayo was beautiful, talented, and absolutely volatile. Their fights became legendary in Hollywood. Neighbors would call the police, thinking someone was being murdered. The press dubbed them the Battling Bogarts. But here's what the gossip columnists didn't understand. Bogart wasn't fighting Mayo because he hated her. He was fighting because it was the only way he knew how to feel alive. In those explosive moments, when she'd throw a glass and he'd slam a door, he felt something other than the numbness that had settled into his bones. Relationship lesson. Number 1, sometimes we choose chaos over emptiness because chaos at least makes us feel something. But true love doesn't require drama to prove its existence. By 1943, Bogart was 44 years old and Hollywood's biggest star. He had everything a man could want: fame, money, respect. But success couldn't fill the hollow space in his chest. Late at night, smoking in his garden, he'd look up at the stars and wonder if he was fundamentally broken, if some men were just meant to love movies more than people. His drinking had gotten heavier. Not enough to interfere with his work. He was too professional for that. But enough to blur the edges of his loneliness. Mayo's jealousy had reached toxic levels. She'd show up on his sets, creating scenes, accusing him of affairs he wasn't even having. The truth was simpler and sadder than Hollywood gossip. Humphrey Bogart was a man who'd spent 44 years building walls so high, he'd forgotten there was supposed to be a door. He'd developed a reputation as Hollywood's most eligible bachelor, who'd never stay eligible for long, and its most married man who'd never stay married forever. Directors loved him because he was reliable, professional, and talented. Women were drawn to him because danger and vulnerability make an intoxicating combination. But nobody, not even Bogart himself, believed he was capable of real, lasting love. What he didn't know was that everything was about to change. Somewhere in New York, a girl from the Bronx was about to walk into an audition that would alter the course of both their lives. His agent had just handed him a script called To Have and Have Not, based on the Hemingway novel. It was a good role, the kind of cynical, world-weary character that fit him like a custom-tailored suit. The female lead would be crucial. She needed to match his intensity without being overwhelmed by it. As he read the script late one night, bourbon in hand, Bogart had no idea he was reading the blueprint for his own transformation. Betty Joan Persky was born in the Bronx in 1924, but her dreams were bigger than her circumstances. Her father abandoned the family when she was 6, leaving her mother, Natalie, to raise Betty and her younger brother alone. Where another child might have developed abandonment issues, Betty developed something else entirely, an unshakable belief that she didn't need anyone to rescue her. Natalie worked as a secretary, struggling to make ends meet, but she never let her daughter see her despair. Instead, she filled their small apartment with stories of glamorous movie stars and Broadway legends. "You're going to be somebody special, Betty," she'd whisper as she tucked her daughter into bed. "I can see it in your eyes. You've got that spark." Betty believed her mother completely, not because she was naive, but because something deep inside her knew it was true. At 15, Betty was working as an usher at a Broadway theater, watching the greatest actresses of her generation, night after night. She studied their movements, their voices, the way they could make an entire audience lean forward with a single glance. "This is what I want," she thought, watching Katharine Cornell command the stage. Not fame, power. The power to make people feel. She enrolled in acting classes at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, working part-time jobs to pay tuition. Her classmates remember her as confident but not cocky, beautiful but not vain. She had something rare, absolute certainty about her own worth that didn't depend on anyone else's validation. By 19, Betty had transformed herself. She'd changed her name to Lauren Bacall. Lauren because it sounded sophisticated, Bacall because it was easier to remember than Persky. She'd learned to lower her voice to that distinctive, smoky register that would become her trademark. She'd discovered that she could look at a man in a way that made him forget his own name. But here's what made Lauren different from every other beautiful girl in New York. She wasn't trying to catch a husband. She was trying to catch a career. Her break came through Harper's Bazaar. Photographer Louise Dahl-Wolfe captured something electric in Lauren's eyes, a combination of innocence and knowing that stopped people in their tracks. The magazine cover caught the attention of Nancy Slim Hawkes, wife of director Howard Hawks. "There's a girl in this magazine," Slim told her husband over breakfast, "who looks like she could give Humphrey Bogart a run for his money." Hawks was intrigued. He was preparing To Have and Have Not, and needed a newcomer, someone unknown enough to be believable as a mysterious woman, but strong enough to hold her own against Hollywood's most intimidating leading man. The screen test was scheduled for February 1944. Lauren took the train from New York to Los Angeles, carrying one suitcase and enough determination to power a small city. She wasn't nervous about the audition. She was excited. This was what she'd been preparing for her entire life. Relationship lesson number 2, confidence, isn't about believing you're perfect. It's about knowing you're worthy of respect, regardless of the outcome. Howard Hawks briefed her about Bogart before they met. "He's professional, he's tough, and he doesn't suffer fools. Don't try to impress him. Just be yourself. If you're meant to work together, He'll know it within 5 minutes. Lauren smiled. She'd been being herself for 19 years, and it had gotten her this far. What Hawks didn't tell her, what nobody in Hollywood would have dared to tell her, was that Humphrey Bogart was trapped in a marriage that was slowly destroying both him and his wife. Mayo's jealousy had reached pathological levels. She'd taken to following him, hiring private investigators, creating public scenes that humiliated them both. Bogart was a man drowning in his own life, desperately looking for something, anything, that felt real. The night before the screen test, Lauren sat in her small hotel room, reading the script one final time. The female character, Marie Slim Browning, was everything Lauren aspired to be: independent, fearless, and utterly self-possessed. She didn't need the male lead to save her. She was perfectly capable of saving herself. Thank you very much. As she prepared for bed, Lauren looked at herself in the mirror and made a promise. Tomorrow, I'm not going to audition to be Humphrey Bogart's leading lady. I'm going to audition to be his equal. She had no way of knowing that across town, Bogart was lying awake too, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he'd ever feel anything real again. The script for To Have and Have Not was on his nightstand, but he wasn't thinking about the movie. He was thinking about a conversation he'd had with Hawks earlier that day. I'm bringing in a new girl for the female lead. She's young, but she's got something special. I think she might surprise you. They all surprise me, Bogart had replied, cynicism dripping from every word. Usually by how quickly they bore me. What neither of them knew was that in less than 12 hours, everything they thought they knew about love, about themselves, about what was possible, was about to be completely rewritten. February 1944, stage 12 at Warner Brothers. The morning sunlight streamed through the high windows as Lauren Bacall walked onto the soundstage for her screen test. She wore a simple skirt and blouse. Nothing flashy, nothing desperate. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands were steady. This was her moment, and she was ready for it. Humphrey Bogart was already there, cigarette dangling from his lips, reading Variety with the kind of casual indifference that had made him famous. He glanced up when she entered, and something shifted in the atmosphere of the room. Later, he would tell friends that he felt it immediately, like someone had plugged him into an electrical socket. Not just attraction, though that was certainly there, recognition. As if some part of his soul that had been asleep for 44 years suddenly opened its eyes. "You must be the new girl," he said, not bothering to stand. This was his usual test. See how they handled his deliberately rude first impression. "I must be," Lauren replied, meeting his gaze directly. "And you must be Humphrey Bogart." "That's what they tell me." "Do you always believe everything they tell you?" The cigarette paused halfway to his lips. Nobody, especially not 19-year-old nobody actresses, talked to Humphrey Bogart like that. Howard Hawks watched this exchange with growing excitement. This was exactly what he'd hoped for. Two strong personalities who weren't afraid of each other. "Well," Hawks interrupted, "shall we see if you two can make some magic together?" The scene they were testing was the famous whistle scene, Marie meeting Harry Morgan for the first time, delivering that iconic line about whistling. But something extraordinary happened when the camera started rolling. Lauren looked directly into Bogart's eyes and delivered her lines with a confidence that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow." But it wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, with a combination of innocence and knowledge that made every man in the room forget to breathe. Relationship lesson number 3. True chemistry can't be manufactured or forced. It's what happens when two people see past each other's defenses to the authentic person underneath. Bogart felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine surprise. This girl, this kid from the Bronx, wasn't intimidated by him. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply, utterly herself, and herself was magnificent. When Hawks called cut, the soundstage was dead silent for a moment. Then Bogart did something nobody expected. He smiled. Not his trademark cynical smirk, but a real smile that reached his eyes. "Kid," he said, walking over to Hawks, "I think you found your leading lady." But he wasn't talking to Hawks. He was talking to himself. Lauren felt it too, that electric current that seemed to arc between them whenever their eyes met. She'd expected to be nervous around Hollywood's biggest star. Instead, she felt safe, as if she'd found someone who understood the language she'd been speaking her entire life. "That went well," Hawks said, grinning like a man who'd just discovered gold. "Yeah," Bogart replied, still looking at Lauren. "I think it did." As Lauren walked off the soundstage that day, she had no idea that Humphrey Bogart was already planning to divorce his third wife. She had no idea that he'd spent the entire screen test thinking not about the movie, but about how he could spend more time with her. All she knew was that something had shifted in her universe. The girl who'd never needed rescuing had just met the man who didn't know he needed saving. The filming of To Have and Have Not began in March 1944, and from the first day on set, everyone could feel the electricity between Bogart and Bacall. But what looked like movie magic to the crew was actually two people falling in love in the most complicated possible circumstances. Bogart was still married to Mayo Methot, and their relationship had devolved into something toxic and destructive. Mayo's drinking had worsened, and her jealousy had reached dangerous levels. She'd taken to showing up on set unannounced, creating scenes that humiliated both her and Bogart. "She'd arrive like a hurricane," one crew member later recalled. "You could see Bogart's entire body tense up the moment she walked through the door." But here's what made it even more complicated. Bogart was falling in love with Lauren, and he knew it was the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. Lauren, meanwhile, was navigating uncharted territory. At 19, she'd never experienced anything like the intensity of her feelings for this complex, troubled man 25 years her senior. She'd come to Hollywood to launch a career, not to fall in love with a married movie star whose personal life was tabloid fodder. Relationship lesson number 4. Real love often arrives at the most inconvenient possible moment, demanding that we choose between safety and authenticity. "I tried to fight it," Lauren would later write in her memoir. "I told myself he was just being kind to the new girl, that the chemistry we felt on camera was just good acting. But late at night, alone in my apartment, I couldn't lie to myself. I was falling for him completely." The situation became more complicated when Mayo began targeting Lauren specifically. She'd call Lauren's hotel room at all hours, sometimes drunk and incoherent, sometimes coldly threatening. She hired private investigators to follow both Bogart and Lauren, looking for evidence of an affair. The cruel irony was that there wasn't an affair, not yet. Bogart was too honorable to act on his feelings while still married, and Lauren was too smart to get involved with a man who wasn't free. But their connection was so powerful that everyone around them could see it. "You could watch them rehearse a scene," director Howard Hawks later said, "and forget that there were 40 other people on the set. They created this bubble of intimacy that nobody else could penetrate." The breaking point came in June 1944. Mayo arrived on set during the filming of one of Bogart and Lauren's most romantic scenes. She'd been drinking, and when she saw the way her husband looked at his young co-star, something inside her snapped. "You little tramp," she screamed at Lauren, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think you can steal my husband? You're just another Hollywood nobody who'll be forgotten in 6 months." The entire soundstage went silent. Everyone looked at Lauren, waiting to see how she'd respond. Lauren stood up slowly, with a dignity that belied her 19 years. "Mrs. Bogart," she said quietly, "I think you should go home." It was the perfect response, calm, respectful, and utterly unafraid. But Mayo's humiliation only made her more volatile. That night, Mayo confronted Bogart at their home. The fight was so violent that neighbors called the police. Mayo threw a bottle that barely missed Bogart's head, then collapsed in tears, begging him not to leave her. Bogart looked at his wife, this talented, beautiful woman who'd been destroyed by her own insecurities, and felt nothing but sadness. "Mayo," he said gently, "we're killing each other. You know that, don't you?" "I know you're in love with that girl," she replied, "and I know you're going to leave me for her." Bogart couldn't deny it because it was true, but the truth felt like another betrayal. Relationship lesson number 5. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go, even when it breaks both your hearts. Meanwhile, Lauren was dealing with her own crisis. The studio executives were pressuring her to distance herself from Bogart to avoid scandal. "Your career is just beginning," they warned her. "Don't throw it away for a married man with a drinking problem and a crazy wife." Lauren spent sleepless nights walking on the beach, trying to figure out what she wanted more: the career she'd worked so hard for, or the love that felt like destiny. "I could have the safe choice," she wrote in her diary. "I could finish this movie, do publicity, take the next role, and build the career I've always dreamed of. Or I could follow my heart into unknown territory with a man whose life is falling apart." The decision was made for her when Bogart finally filed for divorce in September 1944. Mayo fought it viciously, hiring the best lawyers she could find, making public statements that painted Bogart as a villain who'd abandoned her for a child. "The press was brutal," Lauren later recalled. "They painted me as a homewrecker, a gold digger, a naive girl being taken advantage of by a Hollywood predator. Some days I couldn't leave my apartment because of the photographers." But the worst part wasn't the public scrutiny. It was watching Bogart struggle with guilt and regret. He'd wake up in the middle of the night wondering if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Not about Lauren, never about Lauren, but about the pain he'd caused Mayo, about the wreckage of his third marriage. "I felt like I was asking him to choose between me and his conscience," Lauren would later say. "And I wasn't sure I had the right to ask that of anyone." The crisis peaked in November 1944. Mayo, desperate and increasingly unstable, made one final attempt to win Bogart back. She showed up at Lauren's apartment building at 3 in the morning, drunk and heartbroken, begging Lauren to step aside. "Please," she sobbed. "I know you think you love him, but you don't understand what you're taking away from me. He's all I have. Without him, I'm nothing." Lauren looked at this broken woman and felt her heart break. "Mrs. Bogart," she said softly, "I can't make this decision for you or him, but I can tell you that love shouldn't make you feel like nothing. It should make you feel like everything." That was the moment Lauren understood the difference between possessive desperation and authentic love, and the moment she knew she and Bogart had something worth fighting for. The transformation began slowly, then all at once. By December 1944, Bogart's divorce was final, and for the first time in his adult life, he was truly free. Free from a toxic marriage, free from the cycle of guilt and recrimination that had defined his relationships, free to love and be loved without reservation. The change in him was remarkable, Howard Hawks later observed. It was as if someone had turned on a light inside him. The cynicism was still there, that was part of his charm. But underneath it, there was something new: hope. Lauren and Bogart's courtship was unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. Instead of the typical whirlwind romance of publicity stunts and nightclub appearances, they chose intimacy over spectacle. They spent hours talking, really talking, about their dreams, their fears, their childhoods, their future. She made me want to be better than I thought I could be, Bogart told his friend Frank Sinatra. Not perfect, God knows I'm too old and too set in my ways for that, but better, kinder, more honest with myself. Relationship lesson number 6. True love doesn't try to fix your flaws. It makes you want to grow into the person you're capable of becoming. Their wedding on May 21st, 1945, was deliberately small and private. Just close friends, family, and a justice of the peace at Louis Bromfield's farm in Ohio. Lauren wore a simple pink dress and carried wildflowers. Bogart wore a suit he already owned. It wasn't about the wedding, Lauren later explained. It was about the marriage. We wanted to start our life together with authenticity, not spectacle. But the real magic happened after the cameras stopped rolling and the guests went home. For the first time in his life, Bogart experienced what it meant to be in a relationship built on mutual respect rather than need or convenience. Lauren never tried to change him, but her presence inspired him to change himself. His drinking decreased dramatically, not because she demanded it, but because he wanted to be fully present for their life together. She saw me, he would later tell friends. Not the movie star, not the tough guy persona, not the damaged goods from 3 failed marriages. She saw the man I'd forgotten I could be. Lauren, meanwhile, discovered that love didn't have to mean sacrificing her independence or ambition. Bogart became her biggest champion, encouraging her career, celebrating her successes, never asking her to make herself smaller to accommodate his ego. Their professional collaboration continued to be extraordinary. The Big Sleep, 1946, showcased a couple who'd learned to translate their real-life chemistry into cinematic gold. On screen, they were equals, matching each other wit for wit, strength for strength. Working with him was like dancing with the perfect partner, Lauren said. He made me better, and I'd like to think I made him better too. The birth of their son Stephen in 1949 completed Bogart's transformation. At 50 years old, he experienced fatherhood with a wonder that surprised everyone, including himself. I never thought I'd be any good at this, he confessed to Lauren as they watched their baby sleep. I never had a good example of what a father should be. Then you get to write your own rules, she replied. You get to be the father you wished you'd had. And that's exactly what he did. Friends marveled at the domestic happiness of Hollywood's former, most notorious bachelor. He'd rush home from the studio to have dinner with his family. He'd turn down social events to read bedtime stories. He'd wake up early on weekends to make pancakes and listen to Lauren practice her lines. I spent 45 years looking for something I didn't even know I was missing, he told Lauren on their 5th wedding anniversary. Turns out it was peace, the kind of peace that comes from being completely known and completely loved. Their love story wasn't without challenges. Bogart's health began to decline in the mid-1950s, and Lauren became his fierce protector, managing his care while continuing her own career and raising their children. In sickness and in health, she said, when friends worried she was taking on too much. Those weren't just words to us. They were a promise. When Bogart was diagnosed with cancer in 1956, Lauren never wavered. She researched treatments, coordinated with doctors, and maintained their family's stability while privately grieving the future they were going to lose. She gave me 12 years of happiness I never thought I deserved, Bogart said near the end. If this is all we get, it was enough, more than enough. He died in her arms on January 14th, 1957. She was 28 years old, widowed with 2 small children. but the love they'd built gave her the strength to face whatever came next. He taught me that love isn't about finding your other half, she would later say. It's about two whole people choosing to build something together that's bigger than either of them could create alone. Their story reminds us that it's never too late for authentic love, that age gaps matter less than emotional maturity, and that the strongest relationships are built by two independent people choosing interdependence. Bogart and Bacall prove that Hollywood endings are possible in real life, not because everything works out perfectly, but because two people commit to growing together through whatever comes. Hit that subscribe button if you want to discover more love stories that prove fairy tales can be real, and let me know in the comments, what's the most important quality you look for in a lasting relationship? Until next time, remember, the greatest love stories aren't about finding your other half. They're about two whole people choosing to build something extraordinary together.